we should start off the podcast by asking the people in the audience, would you like chicken or beef?
Yeah.
I got so tired of that.
Yeah.
The steward's calling by. Chicken or beef? Chicken or beef?
That's a good story.
I couldn't do it anymore, man.
Well, good morning. Welcome to the Global Church Podcast. I'm Scott.
I'm Jim.
And both of us just returned in the last couple days from two different trips.
Yeah. I was in yesterday morning.
Yep. And I got home the day before from Thailand, and you were in Malawi. And
right.
So what happened in Malawi? What all took place? And
yeah.
How'd it go?
Had a really good trip. And like we mentioned to you guys 2 weeks ago, I met Cedric there and had a excellent time with the Chichewa pastors, going through Ephesians the first 3 days, and then the second 3 days going through 1 Corinthians. So yeah, it was a really good time. Yeah.
So what were some of the highlights?
Yeah, a couple interesting things that took place during the study time with the large group is that when we started off by just seeing if there were any questions or things like that. There were 4 people that it was their first time, never been there before, and there's probably 60 total. One of the gentlemen asked a question. We were a couple of days into the teaching, and so at the end of each session, we would say, does anybody have any questions? Does anybody have any comments about the session that we had just taught? And so I had just finished up a session, and this gentleman asked a question about how does the 10 Commandments fit into what we're talking about with the, with the positional truth that we were laying out in the first 3 chapters of Ephesians. And so I thought that was really interesting and communicated to us, again, like we were talking about on our previous time that we were all together here with the podcast 2 weeks ago, teaching foundationally and systematically and chronologically. Here was a gentleman whose first time it was, and having questions about how do the 10 Commandments fit in with what we were teaching. So his question clearly indicated that he had never been there before. And so that's my point.
Right.
And
that became very evident.
Very evident, right? And so because people that had been there through all the teaching, with creation in Christ and with position in Christ and Acts, Romans, and now Ephesians, they knew how that worked. They knew how the Old Testament, the 10 Commandments, how the Old Testament law, they knew how all that fit together. So it was just insightful that the benefit of coming consistently, to all the teaching. And so I was glad the guy was there. Yeah. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
And there were a couple other people that were there for the first time.
Were any of the Chichewa pastors, did they speak up and answer his question at all, or did they give?
Yeah, they did. yeah, they did. They answered the question, and they also were able to say, that's the benefit of coming all the time. Yeah. And they said that they would, make sure that he got the lessons that he hasn't gotten yet.
Right.
And then we talked about how somebody needs to bring not only him but the other people that were there, up to speed. Yeah. So when I started off the very first day. So
back to that again, just to be try and be a little more specific about because he hadn't been there, because this was his first time,
right? And
the others knew how the 10 Commandments fits into the grand scheme of things. Specifically, what we're talking about is that God's purpose in giving the law was for the purpose of revealing our sin, so that we would recognize our sinfulness in preparation to receive Jesus as a deliverer.
Right.
And so that's a major focal point, major foundational point, coming through creation of Christ, coming through the Old Testament. And when you've missed out on all that teaching, then you don't have a clear grasp of why the 10 Commandments was given.
Yeah.
And so him asking that question exposed the fact that he hadn't been taught through all that foundational truth. And so,
exactly.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah. And the right when we got there, the first session that we had, I did a bit of a review, kind of, where we had been in Romans last time that we were there, where we were going in Ephesians this time that we were there. And again, just communicating to them the importance of studying chronologically and systematically and progressively, and just kind of doing reviewing a big picture of what we've been doing, and why we're now in Ephesians, and what the just introductory as to what the content of Ephesians was going to be in light of everything that we've done. And so when this gentleman posed his question and spoke up, we actually were able to use it as an example. We didn't single the guy out that, hey, you shouldn't be here. We didn't do that.
Right.
We didn't make it look like it was, wrong or bad or an error.
Sure.
But it was an example
Yeah.
as to why
Right.
it's good to start at the beginning.
Right.
And the benefit and the value of starting at the beginning and going all the way
Because these guys are pastors.
Right.
And we're not just there just to teach them the truth, but we're there to also train and disciple them in how to pass the truth on the other people.
Right.
And so it was a great opportunity to give them a case in point of
Exactly.
this is why it's important for you to teach this way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we took that opportunity to do that, not
Right.
to make the folks that were there for the first time feel bad, but use it as an example.
Right.
Yeah, it was good. And then another situation where this was somebody that has been coming for a while. We were midway through, I think, chapter 2 of Ephesians, and again, talking about all that we have in Christ and just the wealth that we have because of the finished work of Christ and our position in Christ. And this gentleman posed the question, in light of all that's true of grace and all that's true of our position, where does guilt fit in? And when in terms of grace,
Yeah.
oftentimes when we sin, we feel guilty. We struggle with condemnation, things like that. Where does guilt and condemnation fit in with grace, our position in Christ, finished work of Christ, walking by, all that's true of that. And again, this was somebody that's been there from the beginning. And I think wrestling with a key question that even myself, I mean,
Sure.
I struggle at times,
Yep.
with guilt and condemnation when I walk in the flesh and
Sure.
and things like that. So that was a question that was relevant from somebody that's been there for a while. But
Yeah.
wrestling with that kind of a question is, I think, exposing and communicating that this guy is really wrestling with some of the deeper truths, understanding the position, but how does it all work in that sense? So that was a really insightful, and it led to a really good discussion because there wasn't anybody in the room that doesn't
struggle with that.
Doesn't struggle with that.
Yeah. And that's very different from, originally we went there thinking that we could just pass the lessons on to these guys and they could take the ball and run with it. And we went back after a time of them using Creation of Christ for a while, and their questions and their feedback was, most of it had nothing to do with the lessons. It was so far out in left field. We realized, well, they're not even getting the point of these lessons. So, and then that's when we realized we needed to actually come and teach them through all of the lessons. So to go from that point to now, here's a guy, that has been through Creation of Christ, position in Christ, Acts, Romans, and now is in Ephesians in the first couple chapters, which is very much about what we have been given in Christ. The moment we got saved, and you're talking about things like acceptance and like, okay, so if I'm really accepted, then why do I feel guilty?
Right.
Which we often do. I mean, it just it shows the progression, and that the foundational teaching is genuinely establishing this man in the faith, and that's how it takes place.
Yep. That's exactly where he was.
Yeah.
If these things are true, and they are true because the scriptures say they're true, it doesn't matter if I feel like they're true or not. They're true no matter how I feel.
Right.
So if they're true, how do I reconcile my feelings of guilt and condemnation with what it says is true of me? And it was excellent.
That's awesome. That's really encouraging.
It was really good. Yeah. Yep. And then, like we mentioned 2 weeks ago as well, we were able to have some of the guys teach. Actually, all the guys taught. All the Chichewa translation team, Stuart, Michael, Robin, and James. All 4 of those guys taught. And so Cedric and I taught through the first 5 lessons, and then those guys took lessons 6, 7, 8, and 9, and then they finished it up. And that was great.
How'd they do?
They did well. They did well. You could hear that they were growing in their understanding of grace and the finished work of Christ and positional truth. And at the same time, it was interesting when they would stick to the lessons. It was clear that they were, walking through point by point by point by point. And then it was interesting when they would kind of get away from the lesson and kind of go on a rabbit trail, for lack of a better term. They might get a bit more man-centered and works-oriented than when they were staying to the lesson. So it was real clear. And when they were, and I mean, Cedric and I had the lessons in front of us, so we were able to follow along as they were teaching through the lessons. And but it was encouraging that they enjoyed it. They had a good time.
So then did they ask you for your input after they taught, or?
Yeah, they did. So we, after the large group left, we went back to Annie's Lodge. We had 3 days with them where we went through 1 Corinthians. And so Cedric and I took one day at least an hour and a half and just walked through their sessions. And
nice.
And Cedric did a really good job. He took a lot of notes and was like, typing away the whole time while these guys are teaching. And so they were very open, very receptive to what we had to say in terms of just direction and input. And they were very, very open to wanting to know what our thoughts were.
Oh, that's awesome.
How they might be able to just look to the Lord, really, and do be used by Him.
And what and what we're doing there with those guys, it's really not much different than well, on one hand, it's not a lot different, but on the other hand, it's very different from what they would experience, or if they were to be trained in an institution, like a seminary or Bible school or something like that. You have these classes where you're teaching, but then you also have classes where homiletics and the art of preaching and all that kind of stuff, where they have to get up before the class and preach a message, and the professor would be taking notes and giving input on it. But the difference is that this is in the context of establishing churches, of establishing pastors who are establishing churches, and it's not just a theory in a classroom. And so that's awesome. That's cool.
Cedric was able to be real clear and honest with them, and I think he's been there a lot. He has a good relationship with those guys.
He does.
And I think it was helpful. It was one African talking to another African. I think that meant a lot as well. So he was able to actually quote them and say, "You said this," because he had been taking all these notes.
Nice.
And you said this, and I wasn't quite sure what you meant by that. It's just what he said. And he says, "This is kind of the way it came across to me when you said that. and it was a little bit confusing. And so they were able to communicate to us what they meant by what they said. And so it was really good back and forth dialogue in terms of their teaching.
Awesome. That's
yeah, I
really
kind of wish
good.
you were there. I know you've been there a lot through the years, and so to begin to see these guys doing it on their own.
Yeah.
And I recorded some. So, down the road we can.
Nice. Yeah. I look forward to.
We can look at some of those.
Hearing that.
Some of those recordings.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, it was good.
So then after you met with the pastors, taught them through Ephesians, and you met with the translation team and went through 1 Corinthians in preparation for them to begin translating it. So how did that go?
It was good on a couple fronts. Where I knew that listening to their teaching, when I knew that there were some areas that maybe needed some clarification in things that they had taught, when those areas came up in the 1 Corinthian lessons, I kind of emphasized those. And so that was helpful to be able to hear them teach those 4 lessons and then go through 1 Corinthians. And I took we took opportunity to do that. Yeah. Where something maybe needed some clarification, and then they weren't quite clear on something. So as we were going through 1 Corinthians, we took opportunity to do that. Yeah. And then we reflected back to where we were in the Ephesians lessons and talked through it that way. So I think that was helpful in terms of just, again, thinking it through more clearly. So what that part of it wasn't even necessarily directed to the content and the context of 1 Corinthians, but it was in the bigger context of even looking back to the Ephesians lessons.
So had you not had those guys each teach a lesson, would you have known those areas to emphasize in 1 Corinthians?
No.
Right.
We wouldn't have known where they would have needed some clarification.
Right.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So that was very helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really helpful. Yeah, and then as we know, 1 Corinthians is a book of correction, and Paul is communicating to them based on their position as seeing them as saints in Christ and those set apart, but he's writing them in terms of their a correction. And so many of the areas where he was correcting and instructing the church in Corinth were some of the very areas where it was very helpful for them to have exposure to the correction and the direction, even in the churches in Chichewa and Malawi. Yeah. So that was it. In fact, we were running a little bit behind. Like there's 15 lessons to get through. So it was starting Monday, because we actually went to church there on Sunday. Okay. And so we didn't start studying on Sunday until almost 2:30. Okay. So Sunday morning we didn't.
Gone. Yeah,
gone. So I was going to skip a lesson or part of a lesson in terms of Christians taking Christians to court. Yeah. Which, as we know, 1 Corinthians deals with.
But that's happening a lot there.
So I asked the guys as we're coming back from church, because I'm getting ready to think through, what are we going to study? Yeah. Where are we going to start when we get back from church after we grab a bite to eat? Right. And I'm thinking, how can we make up some ground here because we're running a little bit behind?
Sure.
So I said, hey guys, this is in advance. I said, hey guys, is there any problem or, is there an issue with Christians taking Christians to court in Malawi within the Chichewa churches? In my mind, thinking no. Yeah. Okay, we can skip a lesson and get ahead, gain some ground. They're like, oh yeah, it's a huge problem. So, so to my point, all the corrective areas that Paul was dealing with Corinth were very, very helpful with these guys with the Chichewa and there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, again, it's on Paul, we call it correction, or corrective teaching, but really what Paul is saying, he says that I can't teach you as spiritual, but as carnal. And then he gives them 5 proofs of their carnality, 5 or 6, however many it is, the division, taking one another to court, abusing the Lord's Supper, the
gifts, wanting to take the gifts to exalt themselves,
right, and then the guy that's sleeping with his stepmother or whatever, where all these things were proofs of their carnality,
right.
And so again, to your point, the way that it builds upon, so these guys have just come through Romans and Ephesians, which both of those books are very key in terms of establishing us in the foundation for living the Christian life, which is our identification with Christ and the finished work of Christ, and that our sanctification is just as much by grace in Christ as our justification was.
Right.
And so now here we're coming into the living out of the Christian life, but it's on this foundation that was laid in Romans and Ephesians.
Right.
So did you feel like they were catching that, that this isn't just a standalone book, that Paul is just giving, some commands for believers to just do their best to try and follow,
right? But
it's actually built upon a foundation.
Yeah, I do. I really think they were catching that, and not only does the biblical text communicate that, but also the lessons communicated that very well. And so as we walk through the lessons over and over again, in the lessons, the issue was their carnality,
right.
And that they were walking in the flesh,
right.
And so again, I mean, it mentions that a lot in the lessons. It actually uses the word they're walking in the flesh, and they were carnal in their carnality. And as we would roll through the lesson, I would say, bullet point 2, underline this. Bullet point 5, underline this. And bullet point 8, underline this. And that was actually where it was pointing out that they were walking in the flesh, and the issue was their carnality, and that Paul was mentioning that so that they would see that in order that they would walk in the Spirit. And so, we just went over and over and over and over with that. Almost to where when we were done, it was like a broken record. By day 3, they're like, okay, got it,
nice.
Okay, got it. I mean, you can never say it enough,
right?
That's really the main point.
Right.
So you want to be continuing to communicate that. But the biblical text is communicating it, but then also, the lessons were as well. So I think
that's awesome.
Lord willing, they got it, and then they, when we go back. And they want us to come back either late March or April, early April, and go through 1 Corinthians with them. At that point, they said everybody will be in Ephesians.
Okay.
Like right now, some of the folks are actually in Romans.
Okay.
But they'll be finishing up Romans, and then they'll be getting into Ephesians. And so by that point, everybody will be in Ephesians, and so they want us to come back, but they want to teach again.
Good.
And it wasn't like they were reluctant, but they actually want to.
Nice.
And so I think them having the desire to do it, we'll be able to see and hear if they caught it. Like what we're saying. The main theme and the points of the lessons, and then Lord willing, we'll hear it. When they teach those lessons next.
So originally when we went to Malawi, we started partnering with Joseph Sekukum, who was a Nigerian missionary sent there by EMS from Nigeria. And so we worked with him in the Chichewa for 4 years or so. And then he returned to Nigeria, and then John and Detuwe Mammon were sent in their replacement. And we had actually invited John and Detuwe to come to our conference, Global Church Focus Week that we had in October. And they had just had a baby in July, but bottom line, they weren't able to get visas.
Right.
And they they had gone to Nigeria to spend an extended time and have the baby and that kind of thing. And while they're there, their house was broken into
Right.
and all that. And then they weren't able to come to our conference. And so how are they doing?
Yeah, that's a great question. We had a good time spending time with them. In fact, on Friday was their anniversary, was their 5-year anniversary.
Huh.
And so John was, I don't know if it's, cultural thing. I think it was cultural that you just don't, necessarily, make that known. So Tatue pulled Cedric aside and said, hey, today's our anniversary, and I just wanted to let you know. And Cedric and I were actually thinking about taking them as a family out to eat. And
Nice.
And so we had talked about it on the side. So we were able to take them out to eat on Friday, which was their anniversary. So we had a real special time.
Nice.
We found a nice little restaurant in town, and took them out, and their son John, who was recently born, and then their daughter, we all went together. So that Odessa, yeah. So that was a good time. They've moved. They got out of that place because where they were just wasn't the best spot of town.
Okay.
And they've got into a better section of town, and so they're relocated and settled into a spot not far from where we meet, kind of between where we meet and the airport. When I was visiting with John the morning that we left, he was actually talking about how God led them to Nigeria for the purpose to get their visa to come here. But then they weren't able to come.
Right.
And he was so appreciative to the church and to FBC that, number one, that God gave them the opportunity to be able to go there to Nigeria to try to get their visas to come here. And he said while they were there, that they were there for 3 months. And so while they were there, they were able to connect with a lot of people in Nigeria or in Josh and around that area and different areas where that really took an interest in their ministry.
Oh, nice.
And so their support was increased.
Oh, good.
And actually God raised up enough money that they were able to get a car.
Wow.
For now they have, wheels.
Wow.
And blunt tire. He's waiting to get his license.
Okay.
But hopefully have his license, Malawian license soon. Yeah, so we talked about that, and he was super appreciative.
Yeah,
and
good.
That
able to see God's hand in it.
Yeah, exactly. Because they'd gone to Malawi, and the scheduled furlough type thing trip back to Nigeria was not anywhere in the near future.
Yeah.
Until we helped them to get back to Nigeria to try to get their
Right.
visas to come here. So even though in the Lord's plan they weren't able to come here, he certainly used their time there to be very encouraging and helpful and so I think they really see the Lord's hand in that. And one thing that was stolen was their computer. We had given him money to get the computer a trip or two ago, and so we were able to leave him money this time to get another computer. So it was good and the two-way. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking, just that it's another example of just that this is God's work.
Yeah.
We're constantly making plans and strategizing, which I don't think we're wrong for doing.
Right.
We've got to plan and strategize and all that, but ultimately it's God's work, and God doesn't always work in ways that we expect, and I think many times he does that on purpose because he's proving that it's his work and it's not our work.
Right.
And I just remember back when Joseph Sekukum just first told us that they were going to be leaving,
right?
And the process that it takes to get pastors and established, church leaders and missionaries on board with what we have to offer, the chronological teaching and the emphasis on grace and the finished work of Christ, and not, obedience is not the means to any part of our salvation. Obedience is not the means to justification. It's not the means to sanctification, and it's not the means to our future glorification. But I think very largely, widely spread, generically, it is the focus of teaching and discipleship. And so the prospect of, beginning with another new missionary,
or someone that might be opposed, might not even want to. Might be going his own way and have his own material and doing his own thing.
Right, exactly. And it was daunting. And it was like, okay, we've been coming here for 4 or 5 years and meeting with these pastors, and we've made some progress. And now you're leaving, and you're going to send another missionary that we're beginning at ground zero with, but he's going to be there all the time with these pastors. So, is he going to be fighting against and opposing? And just the couple that God raised up, and John and Detuwe, and just their humility and teachability, and the way that they have received and embraced the teaching and discipleship. And it's just been such an amazing testimony of the grace of God, and that it really is His work, and that, even though it looked, uncertain to us, he knew what he was doing. Right. And
absolutely. In fact, the gentleman that I mentioned earlier that asked that question about guilt and condemnation, and how does it fit with all that we're learning about grace and acceptance, that was John who asked that question.
Okay.
So there you have it. I mean, just the depth that that God is allowing him to spiritually see things. That was great. Yes, it's testimony again what you're sharing there. With, God, what we thought could be a setback, but in the mind of God, actually, He had it all worked out.
That's right.
Well in advance. And it was He's worked it out for a great thing.
That's cool.
Yeah, and Detuwe shared about how she is James Bonda's wife. The two of them are spending a little bit of time together.
Oh, good.
So it was interesting to hear her share in terms of her desire to spend time with the with the Chichewa women, and so she shared that from up front. One of the meetings, at the close of one of the meetings. So it was good to hear her heart to just, as a missionary there, just to get to know the ladies more, and so that's starting to happen with Bonda's wife, and so see how that develops, down the road for her to have a ministry to the ladies there.
That's awesome. Very good.
Yeah, I think that's
cool.
Good for me for Malawi.
Well, I know that there were probably many that were praying for you, praying for your trip, and
we appreciate.
I know Annette and I was, and mentioned it to Karen while we were there that you were in Malawi and meeting with those folks, and so.
So how was Thailand? Give us some update and details. And
sure. Yeah, it was very encouraging. It was good to just be with them again. After living there.
After 2 years?
Yeah, it'd been 2 years, and after spending so much time with them through the years, when we lived there as a missionary, and those people are just very, very near and dear to our hearts, and we keep in close contact with them, and so just to be able to be there, and it was like going home again, just being with family, and these things have really changed there a lot of growth and expansion, a lot of just even in the cities, even in Chiang Mai and all like that, just things have just changed a lot, and a lot of just how it is, things expand and increase, and and then get up to the village, and it was the same way. And there's just so many. Every time we go up there, there's new houses popping up, in different places, and all like that. And it was really funny. I mean, so the purpose in going was a few months ago, not to one of the main church leaders of the church, and who had been my language informant all the years we were there, called and said that they're planning a giant Christmas celebration and inviting believers from all over, and they wanted to know if we could come. And they specifically, said anyone from FBC that would want to come, we would love to have them. And he specifically named John and Jill Dennis. And because John and Jill they've gone with us. This is probably the 5th or 6th time that they've gone. And way back, a number of years ago, they just came to us and said that, that if there's ever a trip that they could go along on their own dime, they would like to go with us sometime. And we said, well, we're going to Thailand, and you'd be welcome to come along. And they did, and they got hooked, and they just fell in love with the people, and the people fell in love with them, and it's just really interesting. The Karen don't speak English. There's a couple of guys that have had enough exposure that they can say a few simple things in English, but really,
not much.
It's not like any other country we go to, and so they're there, and the only way that John and Jill could communicate anything is through us. The only way that any Karen could communicate anything to them is through us, but the love of Christ, shines through your life, through action and through your countenance, and so they fell in love with the people, and I think it became very obvious to the people, and then they went again and then again, and it's to the point where oftentimes when I see John in church, he's often asking me, have you heard from the boys? Meaning the Karen guys, and really they really love them and care about them, and then the Karen, whenever we're there, there's been times we've gone without John and Jill, and they specifically want to know how John and Jill are doing. So this relationship has been built, and one of our trips there, a couple times ago, one of the guys in the village, he's not a believer. His wife comes to church, which is kind of odd for Karen families. Usually they come as a family, but this guy, he's very industrious. He's a very hard worker, and he was, while we were there, we had started a coffee project. We had set up a demonstration site where we were introducing natural farming techniques. The Karen would traditionally do a slash and burn farming, where they just cut everything down and burn it. And
then that's really hard on the land.
Very hard. Lots of erosion. Then then in the recent years, they had gone into cash crops like cabbage and now corn, that where they're using a lot of chemical fertilizers and pesticides and all that kind of stuff, which is even harder on the land. So while we were there, we had introduced some natural farming techniques to where you're rotating crops. Their land is on mountainsides, and you've seen it. It's very very steep, and so we were encouraging them to plant these hedgerows of nitrogen fixing crops that would help prevent the erosion, be putting nitrogen back into the ground, rotating your rice crops with other things like beans that are nitrogen fixing, and but it's a slow process. You're not going to get the return that today, like you get from planting cabbage and corn and that kind of thing, and then one of the other things we were planting in that demonstration site was coffee, just trying to get a coffee project going. And it
not to mention you like good coffee.
Yeah. But it never took off. It just we had a guy hired to oversee the project, and I went with him to receive a lot of the natural farming training and all that kind of stuff, and implemented it, there and everything. But, when we left, pretty much the project died. But the coffee continued on, and they weren't really expanding it or really, taking care of it. But this other guy, his name's Joe Cleet, he decided he wanted to start planting coffee. He had seen this little coffee grove that we had going there and stuff. And
is he the guy when we were there with Victor and Adriana? That the same guy?
Yeah.
We went and saw his grove?
Right, exactly.
Okay. Oh, great. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And so on this trip, a few times ago, Joe Cleet, he's bagging up coffee seeds, ground and these coffee beans to plant and start these seedlings, and so John got a burden for him, and wanted to help him, and gave him a financial gift to be able to get more materials, more bags, more all that kind of stuff, fertilizer and the things that he needed to get it going, to expand it. And this was I don't know, maybe 5-6 years ago, maybe more like 8 years ago.
Okay.
Or maybe even 10. It's been a while, and to go back now, like when we were there, you and I were there 2 years ago, to go and see this coffee grove that he has going. He has a few thousand trees growing.
Wow.
The year you and I were there, he had gathered over 600 kilos, which is like 1,200 pounds of green coffee, and taken out and sold to a middleman. And this year, it wasn't ready to be harvested yet, but he's expecting over 1,000 kilos, which is over a ton of coffee. And then next year, he's wanting to get some of the equipment so that he no longer has to sell to a middleman who will take it further. Like all he's doing is just picking the beans with the berry that's got a red berry around the outside and then selling it like that. He wants to take the process to the next couple stages where he has the machinery to take off the berry on the outside, and I think even dry it to a point where the inner hull can be taken off as well.
Okay.
Then he can sell it at a much higher price point. And so, here's a guy that John on Jill and one of their trips years ago invested in, and now to be able to go back and walk through his coffee grove and see how it's taken off, and I think it was really, really encouraging to them, and so it was cool that they could go back again. And Joe Cleet obviously had remembered him and remembered him as someone who had helped him, and was very appreciative and all that. So the Christmas celebration was the Karen guys were viewing it as a very important thing for them and their relationship in the community with unbelievers. The celebration isn't so much for unbelievers; it's more for the church and believers to get together and celebrate, the God's grace and sending Jesus. But in the cultural Karen cultural mindset, that by tradition they're animists, they're worshiping spirits, and when things aren't going according to what you need and want from the spirits, like your kid gets sick and they're not getting better, and through all your sacrifices that you're doing, or the weather isn't cooperating, you're either getting too much rain or not enough rain, and the rice crop isn't good, then they start doing these divinations to find out what spirits are offended and need to be appeased and what sacrifices need to be made. And eventually, when needs aren't being met through those processes, then here's these group of believers, these group of Christians, and they're meeting. I'm gonna try Christianity, and so that often happens. And we've found through the years that people have to be brought to that point in order to even be willing to come and listen to anything.
Yeah, right.
They have to be brought to the point where I think I want to become a Christian, and then at that point they'll they'll be willing to begin to listen. And so for the, it's now been, we've had believers there in the village now since 1995. So that's 24 years.
24 years.
That there have been believers there.
Right.
And a lot of growth and establishment has taken place. And, those initial believers met in the home of one of the first families. Mm-hmm. Then they were able to build this little bamboo hut to begin meeting in as a church. It at least wasn't a house.
Right.
It was,
its own designated place set for the church to meet at.
Right.
Right.
And and this is taking place over the period of time. Then they were able to build a bigger wooden building to use as a more room, but a better built, more higher quality building to meet in, which was right next to the little hut. Mm-hmm. And the little hut was used as like children's Sunday school. And then during the course of time, the believers are, continuing to become established, interacting with the village, interacting with unbelievers, and at times the unbelievers wanting to kick them out of the village and have them move out and begin their own area on their own. But God always divinely intervening and never forcing, making that have to happen. Yeah. And then eventually the little hut was torn down, and a second building, wooden structure was made, and it was better than the first one. And so then that one becomes the main church gathering, and then the one below it becomes the children's and teens area to meet separate during the church service. And then, what was it, 2013, I think it was, 12 or 13, they decided that, it was time to build a more, even higher quality, nicer cement building. And, we as a missions program contributed some to that. They as a church, gave to that, and they themselves funded a lot of it. The Karen Baptist organization that they're a part of there in Thailand, they gave towards it. And so they've been meeting in that ever since. Okay. Well, they've got believers coming from other villages that they're just not a part of a big enough gathering there to really meet together. Some of them are in...
Are those believers coming every week?
Yeah.
Okay.
And then some of them are in villages where just the unbelievers refuse to allow them to meet together. And so they're coming. Well, they're to the point now where they're wanting to find another area and build even a bigger church.
In Maypay?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so my point in sharing all this is just that the way that they're so established in these buildings that God has enabled them to be able to build, what that communicates to the unbelievers is just the credibility of Christianity, the credibility of these beliefs that these group of believers have, and this God that they're following, and that it's not going away, that it's actually increasing, and it's growing, and it's becoming more and more established and more credible.
Right.
And so that for them to have this big Christmas celebration where you have believers coming from many different other areas of Karen villages, that it was just I think just a real testimony to the unbelievers of just the credibility of Christianity, that it's not just an isolated thing here in Maypay, that you have all these other well-established, influential Karen believers coming from other areas, and so that was kind of why they were viewing it as being so important to do. Right.
To be an influence and to communicate that to the unbelievers. Yeah.
And so
since it's about a bit of a outreach mindset, to communicate that.
Exactly.
Not just about them and getting together to celebrate, but communicating to the unbelievers.
Yep.
Yeah.
So the celebration was held on Saturday, this past Saturday, the 14th, and it began in the morning and went until 11 at night, something like that. The very next morning, Sunday morning in church, was an older couple in the village, unbelievers, had never been a part of the church, never come to the church, that have been a part of a family and part of a clan that has been very opposed to the church and the Christians in the past.
Wow.
And so they very much feel that, them coming and just seeing the scope of all this and the credibility of Christians and Christianity, that had an effect on them.
Sure.
And so,
wow.
And they were, they even, in the church service, even highlighted that this couple were there and they're in front of everyone, and this couple just praising God for, his work in their life and bringing them to this point, and that they would, want, are desirous of wanting to become Christians. And
is there any significance that it would be an older couple or not necessarily? Culturally, is there any significance to that?
It is, in the sense that usually, the older you are, the more stuck in your ways you are.
Right.
And so, this is someone that they probably have never even been to school. This couple's pretty old.
Right.
And, they've been spirit worshipers, animists, for decades, and are very stuck in their ways and very established in these things. And Christianity is it is a new thing,
right?
In that regard,
right?
And so, just to be brought to that point is, it's. I think you would, expect it more of the younger generation, embracing change than you do and the Karen are even more so that way,
right?
And so, it was
not that any of us are, in the numbers, necessarily, but give us a feel for, how many people were at the celebration and people coming from different villages. And I assume people that came from different villages spent the night and then were at church the next morning, or not necessarily.
Some did. Many returned. But there were definitely some. There was there had to have been somewhere around 700 or 800 people.
Wow.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, so I've been to the newest church that you're describing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't hold 700 or 800 people.
No, this was held over on the school grounds.
So where was it? Okay.
Yeah, over in the school.
That's a think about our sanctuary here. If it's full of people.
Yeah. 900
people.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just giving us a feel for what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Is that amount of people that came.
Yeah.
And this is a very remote area, and the other villages that you're talking about are even more remote than Mepe. Wow.
Yeah, and
I didn't know that.
And they fed them all.
Wow.
The Karen, the church in Mepe fed them all. Yeah.
Did you have like pig roast? I mean, I've been a pig roast. I've been a part of pig roast there through the years gone by, and
they had a lot of pork and a lot of veggies, a lot of other things. They had these giant. I got these pictures and video footage of these giant cauldrons of food, on a fire. The ladies stirring them, and just multiple pots that huge, all being made at the same time. And
so, would you say most of the 800 were believers?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, there were a lot. I mean, the only unbelievers that were there were from our village, and there were definitely many of them. I don't know. It was dark. There was a few lights set up. The day kind of began with sports in the morning, and then there was lunch, and then into the afternoon, and then late afternoon, early evening, people started arriving from other places. I mean, some did come earlier for the sports, some of the younger groups, and then
the rest just came for the big meal.
Yeah,
no, just kidding.
Right. Yeah. No, there was a celebration program that evening, and a main speaker, and some skits and a lot of singing, that kind of thing.
Wow.
And so it was held on the school grounds, which is a big flat area, and there was a real big cement pad, and a lot of tarps were laid out for people to sit on.
Right.
Well, then a lot of chairs were set up too, but most of the unbelievers, I think, were kind of like sitting on the outskirts, sitting on the edge, watching and listening,
kind of checking it out.
Not so much sitting in the middle of things, on the tarps on the cement pad.
Yeah.
But there were, there were people all around sitting, listening. Yeah,
that's amazing. And again, not that we're into numbers, but God's given me the chance to be there with you guys a lot. Rach and I were there a long time ago with you guys in the early days. But to think about God, just reaching into that many people's lives in that area, and for there to be a gathering like that, it's just kind of blowing my mind actually a little bit to envision something like that taking place. I mean, that's amazing. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, that's great.
And then of course we had gotten there up to the village on Monday. Would have been a week ago Monday. So we were there all week before the celebration took place, and so it was really good to sit around and visit the guys, and just talk about the church, talk about their families, talk about how they're doing and that kind of thing, and where things are at. And it was really interesting how when Annette and I first moved up to that village, there wasn't nobody had a truck, nobody even had a motorcycle, there wasn't even a bicycle. I mean, nothing. Nothing. Right. My motorcycle was the first motorcycle up there, of somebody that lived there. Our truck, the first truck. Today, there's so many trucks and motorcycles, you can't count them all. There's people that have 2, 3, 4 vehicles. There's Kubota tractors. There's guys with even excavators up there now that I didn't see them, but they were telling me.
Right.
Man, just the growth, the prosperity that's taken place there. And so he made the comment that I asked him, I said, so what would you say, is the church's greatest need right now? And he wasn't just talking about the church, but he was just talking about Karen culture in general, how it's changing. That before it was everything was controlled. Everything they did was controlled by the spirits and their fear of the spirits, and wanting to make sure that everything is done right so they don't break any taboos, because that's where bad things come from. The spirits are upset and they make things happen, and so that controlled and governed their lives. Right. And he said it's not so much that anymore. It's this competition. In the way he described it, he said this competition between people to see who can own the most stuff. Wow. I mean, how many times have we heard that said about our own culture? Absolutely. Our own, the materialism. And that's exactly how he described it. And
keep up with the Joneses.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so they're not as, even the unbelievers, many of them are moving away from, I think they're still, they're still doing ceremonies and they're still doing sacrifices and that kind of thing, but the fear of everything is just far less. And it's not because, as unbelievers, they're not, they're turning to materialism is what they're turning to. They've made more money than they've ever made before, and they're buying these brand new trucks. I mean, not just used trucks, brand new trucks. Wow. And just the amount of money that's being made now in corn and cabbage and that kind of stuff, and so it also then brings its challenges into the church. Sure. But it was fun sitting there talking with them that, really, it doesn't matter what the issues are. if it wasn't materialism, in the church, it would be other fleshly manifestations.
Right.
Because that's our problem. Our problem isn't necessarily in the individual issues that you have as a believer, but it's in the source of those issues.
Right.
And that source is always the same, whether your issue is materialism or gluttony or drunkenness or anger or pride or lust or whatever other manifestation there is. And so it gave us really good opportunity again to just emphasize the importance of discipleship, and what real discipleship is, and really what our goal is in discipleship. And when you establish the goal of discipleship, which is Christ-likeness, it's learning to walk less in the flesh and more in the spirit.
Right.
When you understand that's where you're headed and that's your goal, then that determines how you go about it.
Right.
That determines your process for discipleship.
Yeah.
Which again comes back to the foundational teaching and the content of that teaching.
Right.
And so, it was exciting to, here's a cultural shift that's taken place, in their lives and in their community, and it's bringing to light new fleshly manifestations.
But the answers are always the same.
And they've always had it.
Yeah.
They've always had the answer.
Yeah.
And which is the finished work of Christ and their identification with Christ and walk in the Spirit and not in the flesh. And, and so it was really...
Wow. Yeah. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So previously...
It was.
In their flesh, they were occupied with the spirit world.
Yep.
And not that that's gone away completely.
Yep.
But now, in their flesh, the unbelievers are more occupied with materialism.
Yeah.
Mixed with some spirit worship.
Right.
But more the materialisticness of things is kind of taken over to a degree, their occupation with the spirit world.
Yep.
Wow. And that's very interesting.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then that's exactly what we were talking about when you were talking about Malawi with 1 Corinthians. That that's what Paul was doing. You're not spiritual. You're carnal. Here's the proof of your carnality. It didn't matter what their issue was. It didn't matter if your issue was division, or if your issue was taking one another to court, or if your issue was abusing the Lord's Supper. The root cause was the carnality, walking in the flesh and not in the spirit. Right. And so it was, it's the same with the Quran. It's the same with our culture. It's the same with every culture. And so it again just it made me so thankful for the way that God has led us through the years. And I think, just, and again, not because we're anything in and of ourselves, but just because of His grace and mercy and what He is, how He has chosen to work in our lives and through our ministry and through this church, that, we're, I think we're on track with, the truths that truly establish people in the faith. Right. And that even though they're seeing a new cultural manifestation of the flesh, they've had the answers all along, and continue to establish people in those truths. And so Sunday I had the opportunity to share a little bit, and they had a couple of the other pastors from other areas had stayed over and were there, and so they actually had one of those guys speak the main message Sunday, but then gave me the opportunity to share whatever thoughts I had or whatever I wanted to share. And so I just spoke along those lines of, that it was encouraging. It was interesting for Annette and I to come back and just see the amount of vehicles and everything that's there and the prosperity. But to even, and I told him, I said, I praise God for the way that He's blessed you and given you these opportunities to make money and get new vehicles and all this stuff. But don't put your heart in these things. Just enjoy them as gifts from God. And our hope, in this life is the place that He's preparing for us. Not the place that we're, trying to create for ourselves here. And I said, it doesn't matter if God gives you the opportunity to live in a mansion in Bangkok or live in a mud hut, up here in the mountains.
Right. Yeah.
Compared to, and we read, in John 14, 1 through 4, Jesus' promise to go and prepare a place for us, compared to the place that he's preparing for us.
Right.
The Karen have this, there's different insects and bugs and all that up there. They have this one, it's called a kikat in Karen. It's a dung beetle, and it lives in cow pies and eats
Nice.
maybe the other bugs that once the decay starts, and maybe eats the other bugs that are in the cow pie, but it's living in the cow pie. And so I said the place that Jesus is preparing for us, what we're living in here, whether it's a mansion or a mud hut, all of it is all of it is the house of a kikat, the house of a dung beetle, compared to what he's prepared for us up there. And so it was just it was encouraging that you don't have to with the way that we go about trying to establish people in the faith, teaching foundationally, and the emphasis on the finished work of Christ, and understanding that whatever your fleshly stronghold is,
right,
and we all have them. We all have fleshly strongholds. We all have fleshly manifestations. Whether whatever it is, the source is the flesh, and the solution is to walk in the Spirit.
Right.
And so it was just we don't have to focus on these fleshly manifestations or these fleshly issues as the way as the solution to discipleship, or the source of discipleship. I mean, I think once that foundation is laid and there are fleshly manifestations, I think it's appropriate maybe to do what Paul did in 1 Corinthians and highlight them as manifestations of the flesh. But okay, so the Corinthian believers stop taking each other to court, and they stop dividing, and they stop trying to exalt themselves through their spiritual gifts.
Right.
Well, what does that make them? Does that make them more spiritual? Not necessarily.
Right.
They might be just as fleshly.
Right.
And so
again, the teaching, years gone by, as you shared in our last time together, years gone by, the teaching wasn't against spirit worship.
Right.
The teaching was about God.
Right.
And so 2 weeks ago you shared how teaching about God who created the spirits, in lesson 4 freed Kwa Gong before he was even saved to go into the graveyard. And I actually shared that story in Malawi.
Right.
And so it's not teaching against the spirits. It's just teaching about God that frees them from the spirits. And it's not teaching against materialism. That's going to free them from materialism. It's teaching them about God. That's going to free them from materialism. So I think that's what you're saying. It's not teaching against the spirit worship. It's not teaching against materialism. It's teaching about God and all that is true of him and who he is, and true of us because we are in him. And that frees us to be truly enjoying him and walking with him. Free of the spirits, free of materialism, free of taking people to court, free of adultery, free of all these things that we're talking about. It's just laying out God and his greatness and his truth, and know the truth, and the truth will set you free. I am the way, the truth, and the life. It's all about him.
Amen. And then just one last highlight. We took our oldest grandson Isaiah along, and his mother Naomi and Joel's wife Rachel are sisters, and their parents are missionaries in Thailand. Well, their grandparents Naomi and Rachel's grandparents on their mother's side, they'd been missionaries in Thailand since the late 40s, and then they finally left the field in just before we moved back. So it was around 2004 or 2003 or 5 or something like that. Well, the place that they had ministered in for many, many, many years, we call CDM. It was the National Training Center, and that's like 2 hours from our village. And so while Isaiah was with us, we took him with us. We wanted to take him down there to see the place where his great-grandparents had ministered for many, many years.
Right.
Well, it turned out to be their break, but there was still a missionary couple there that they had come to the field 6 years or so after we had gotten to the field, and we got to know them through the years there. And well, one of the younger couples from our church a number of months ago had called me and said that, you know, he just wanted some counsel and some direction. He's wanting to become more grounded, wanting to go off to a place and study the Bible more, more focused. And the place that he was talking about going just really wasn't in line with, you know, our doctrine and how, you know, the doctrine that we had established our church there on. And so I encouraged them to go to CDM, go to this national training place by New Tribes, or now Ethnos 360. And so this couple have been students there. Well, unbeknownst to me, the day we took Isaiah down and to go visit that location, this couple, everyone else was gone but the missionary couple and then this young couple from our village. And they were sticking around during the break to work there on the grounds, and they'd help pay for some of their bill through working and that kind of thing. Well, it turns out that this couple had been having some relationship issues in their marriage. And so because we were there, the missionary then talked to us about it. We speak their language and all like that. And this was on Wednesday. Their plan was to come up on Saturday for the Christmas celebration and be there, and then Sunday after church go back. Well, that was only going to give us, you know, a day and a half to spend with them, and most of that time is going to be, you know, the celebration and me. So we were going to have really zero time to talk with them.
You've been real busy.
So right then and there, can you come back to the village sooner? Well, the wife and son got in the vehicle with us, and we brought them back to the village, and the husband got on his bike, and so they were up there for the rest of the time.
Awesome.
And so we were able to sit down and meet with them and just share these exact same truths, you know, that we're talking about. The issue isn't, you know, who's doing right and who's doing wrong and what she's doing and what you're doing. The issue is, are you walking in the flesh or are you walking in the spirit?
Right.
That's your issue in your marriage.
Yeah.
And so we got Natu and his wife and Nakwat, you know, some of the other church leaders and couples, and sat down, and Annette and I, and talked with them together. And so it was just really thankful for the way that God worked. And, you know, had we not had Isaiah along, we probably wouldn't have taken the time to go visit the National Training Center.
Right.
But because we did, you know, found all that out. And so again, it just comes back to another testimony of it's God. This is God's work, and He leads and guides and directs us to, you know, where He wants us, when He wants us to minister to, you know, who He wants. And,
right.
And so
one question I had was with the main guys, Natu, Nakwat, Kwagong. Do you see them like raising up new leaders, or the kind of the next generation of leaders? Nakwat, Natu, are they about your age? And, you know, so do you see the next generation of leaders coming up, or what's that look like?
Yeah, there's definitely more they could be doing in terms of being real specific with you know, putting some of these. I mean, they are putting, you know, some guys into some leadership roles. It's more of governing roles and decision-making roles and like that than it is really
teaching roles,
teaching and discipleship.
Okay.
So there's definitely It would be good to see them doing more of that.
Okay.
But they have been, from the time we left until now, they continue to just, begin at the beginning and teach all the way through, and come back to the beginning and teach all the way through, and come back to the beginning and teach all the way through. And they're on their, I don't know, 5th or 6th time through. That's
what I was going to ask. So how many times have they been through it?
Yeah. And so in terms of people being, established in the faith, I think they've done a great job of really building a foundation.
Yeah.
I think in terms of our involvement with them in the future and encouragement and stuff, it needs to be more along the lines of really encouraging them to, be more specific and more direct and deliberate in getting some of these younger guys into ministry roles.
Right. Yep.
Where they're actually teaching and discipling.
Right.
How much goes on, in the course of daily lives and in the village and other places and in their homes, in the lives of people and what's shared, and I mean, who knows?
Right.
Right.
Sure.
But yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. So
Awesome.
I think that pretty much sums it up. And
well, great to hear that.
Yep. Amen.
And thankful to the Lord for giving us both the opportunities for both of these trips.
Amen.
And,
Amen.
So thanks for joining us this time, and
thank you for your prayers, and during our both of us being gone last week, and the times we had with the people, and it's God is it's just always encouraging to go and visit and just see, to see. Not that we doubt that God is faithful, but to actually go and see that He just continues to be faithful, and that how He's using us and what He's using us to do is genuinely establishing people in the faith, and it's and establishing their churches. It's just really encouraging.
Right. Yep.
And
absolutely.
If it wasn't for this church, if it wasn't for the body, and the prayers and the financial support and everything that comes through this body, by the body, none of this would be taking place.
That's
and
right.
So we're extremely thankful for FBC and everyone that's a part of it.
Yeah. Yep.
So, thank you.
Take care.